All right, I believe we are live. Hello, everyone. Happy Tuesday. We are just a minute after the top of the hour here, so I'm going to go ahead and get us started right away. My name is Heather Grant. I am one of the community admins for the maintenance community by Upkeep. Thank you all for being here today. If you are not already a member of the maintenance community on Slack, we would love to have you join us. I will send the link on how to sign up in the chat shortly. Today I have Jake with me. Jake is the founder and owner of JMA Human Reliability, where he partners with innovative teams in high-hazard industries to give them practical strategies to reduce errors and build expertise. Jake, thanks so much for being here.
Yep.
The recording from today's session, as well as a summary of this presentation, will be available in the maintenance community on Slack. If there's anyone else who you know who would benefit from this really interesting conversation we're going to have today, please feel free to send them the replay or the invitation to Slack directly. Final piece of housekeeping right before we get started. You'll notice that Jake and I are the only ones with cameras and microphones turned on today. So if you want to ask or answer any questions of Jake, you will use the chat feature on the right-hand side of your screen. Feel free to chat questions throughout the presentation. I will drop them into the conversation where it's appropriate, and then we should have some time at the end left over to answer any questions that come up. Thank you once again for joining, and Jake, let's get started.
Sounds good. So I am typing something into the chat thread. Welcome, everybody. Hello. I think most of us have not met before. I want to give a quick shout out to my good friend Bob Latino, who I believe is on the call with us. Yeah, very good. Thank you for connecting me with this group. This is going to be hopefully an interesting talk. I'm hoping, folks, that I'm going to be able to give you kind of some perspective that you have not seen before. I am not a maintenance engineer. I am not an engineer. I work with some very technical people, quite a few engineers, scientists, technicians of all stripes. I worked for a utility, a large electric utility in Virginia for about 10 years, safety and training department, and learned some of the crazy things that I'm going to be able to tell you today. We're going to focus today on one subset of what I do, which is called human performance or human reliability, which is the idea of how do we minimize or manage human errors, human and organizational errors, as opposed to mechanical errors. And most of you already know there's two completely different sets of rules. We're going to focus today or answer the question today, why can't we just proceduralize everything? And what are a couple practical alternatives? And I'm typing in something in the chat thread right now, but my typing is going really slow, so I won't be typing much in the chat thread. Please, as you start to think up questions, go ahead and just put them into the chat thread. Heather will pick up if I don't see them, and we will try to answer them sometime during the webinar, and definitely we're going to have about 15 minutes towards the end to look at things. So start putting in some good questions. Why can't we proceduralize everything, and three practical alternatives? Let me start with a story that's probably pretty different from ones that you have heard in the past. This story involves three people. Melissa, who is a premature baby in a NICU, a neonatal intensive care unit. It also involves Linda, who is the nurse for Melissa, taking care of young Melissa, and Darlene, who is the charge nurse. She's the supervisor, kind of in charge of all the different nurses, including Linda. So one night, very late, about 1 o'clock in the morning, Darlene is walking through the floor. Linda is kind of in charge and taking care of the kids. Darlene doesn't do much patient care anymore. She supervises, does budgeting, management, staffing, things like that. And in fact, trained Linda and mentored her. But Darlene misses doing the work, being hands-on and taking care of the little babies. And as she walks past Melissa's little isolette, the little crib they keep them in, and they're all sleeping that late in the day, Darlene says to herself, okay, let's see, Linda's doing everything right, but something's not right with Melissa. Can't quite put my finger on it, but something's not quite right. She notices a few things. There's some mottling of the skin, which is normal by itself. There's a little drop of blood on a Band-Aid on the heel, which is where they take the blood in the NICU, and that again is not abnormal either. Notices a couple of other things, none of which are abnormal. None would raise any red flags by themselves. So Darlene goes over to Linda and talks with her and says, hey Melissa, been lethargic? And Linda says, well, actually, now that you mention it, yeah, a little bit, but it's within limits. And so they say, fine, everybody's following all the procedures, but Darlene, who's been doing this stuff for 20-something years, says, okay, something's wrong. Call up Dr. Bao right now and ask her to authorize a sepsis test right now. Sepsis, which is the kind of infection of the bloodstream, is one of the biggest killers in NICUs. And once you get it, it's really hard to get rid of it. So it's super important to get ahead of the curve and catch it before it goes exponential, as they say. So they caught it, and they did the test and accelerated the test to get it done very quickly, and found out that, guess what? Melissa did have sepsis. And they caught it, were able to give antibiotics in time to save her. And if they hadn't, they might not have been able to save her. Here's one example of everybody doing everything according to procedure. Linda's a great nurse, watching the kids like a hawk, and did everything by the book, by procedure. But somebody who had some experience that was not proceduralized or proceduralizable saw what they call a constellation of symptoms, took quick action, and saved somebody's life. If you want to read more about it, a great way to do it is in this book, which is Gary Klein, is The Power of Intuition, which used to be called Intuition at Work. I thought it was a much better title, but that's up to Gary. I'm going to try to post this into the chat thread. So that's one great example. All right, so let's move on. A procedure. Okay, what is a procedure? Dictionary says it's a particular way of acting and doing, or a particular way of acting or doing things, or a series of steps followed in a regular, definite order. You all are experts at doing things by procedure, right? So there's a common belief out there in many, many organizations, not just the ones that you're in, that the best way to improve safety and reliability overall is to create really detailed work procedures and enforce strict compliance, basically to proceduralize everything. Okay, so before we jump into whether this works or doesn't, I think you already know where that's going. Let's look at where that belief came from. The oldest kind of modern history, piece of modern history where this came from is probably about 1911, and a theory called scientific management from a guy named Frederick W. Taylor. You can see the fashion statements back then, 1911. What Frederick W. Taylor, or F.W. Taylor among friends, said is, it's only through enforced standardization of methods, enforced adoption of the best implements and working conditions, and enforced cooperation that this faster work can be assured. Now I read that, and what I hear is enforced, enforced, enforced. A lot of strictness, a lot of compliance, and obviously a lot of procedures. Now, you may think, well, that's 1911, a lot of water has gone under the bridge since then. Maybe, but maybe not. The Academy of Management looked over all the books written on management in the 20th century, which is, of course, most of them, and they voted this in 2001 the most influential management book of the 20th century. Think of all the stuff that's come out in the late 20th century about different ways of managing, different insights, evidence-based stuff, and they still thought this one from 1911 made the biggest change. That gives you an idea of where kind of some people's heads are. So that's not the only reason we tend to proceduralize everything. The Toyota Way is a book I believe came out in about 2001, and that was where Deming started talking about the quality movement. I'm sure you all are masters of this far more than I am. Deming said if you can't describe what you're doing as a process or closely related a procedure, then you don't know what you're doing. Pretty clear. And a lot of that got inculcated into a lot of people that said, well, if you can't write it down, if you can't put it into a step-by-step process or procedure, you don't really know what you're doing. Well, in some places that probably holds true, like car manufacturing plants. But in a lot of other places, I think it's not true. I'm curious as to some of your experiences. I've given you a little bit of a heads up on what we're going to talk about today and what you're going to learn, but I'm curious as to what you know. So I'll get to a question in just a second, but right now, I kind of want to know how many of you all have any kind of experience with interactive webinars. You can click on the link, so check in your chat thread. Just go ahead and click on that link. It'll take you to a quick Google form. I think there's one question on it. Or if you want to have a little bit more fun with it, pull up the camera on your phone, and if you know how to do this, great. Go ahead and scan that QR code. You can take the form right on your phone. Everything's anonymous, of course, and you will start to see the results come up right here. In a second, I'm going to switch over to this, but go ahead and click on that link or the QR code. It'll take you to the same form. And these are the responses. We've got 5 people, 7 people responding. And here's the responses so far. Okay, 8% of people are saying, I like them. I like these kind of interactive polls. 2 people, 15% are saying, hey, the QR code worked. 23% are saying the link worked, the Google link worked. About 15% kind of skeptical, saying, you know what, I haven't decided yet. And about 14% of people are saying, no, this is freaking me out, man. I don't like this. So hopefully you'll get more comfortable with it by the end of the workshop. We've got a few more of these kind of polls coming in, and I think they're kind of fun, especially because they come up real time. Looks like we've got 32 people, 15 responses. That's okay. I'm going to shift over to the second question here, which is the real question I want to ask you about, which is, what's the current procedure culture in your organization? This is a new link, and go ahead and click on that link. It looks like 2 links together, but it's just the second link. And of course, if you want to, click on the QR code. What's the current procedure culture within your organization? Take just a minute to scan it there. I'll give you a few more seconds to scan it. And we've got 33 people, and let's see if we can get at least 25, maybe 28 responses. Okay, we got 2 responses, and it is a few questions, so we'll give another minute for people to finish up here. And I'm going to take a quick scroll through the chat list just to see if there's any burning questions up there so far. Very good. Kim, Andre, Ahmed, Hector, very good. Thanks for dialing in and saying where you are. Naved, Bob, very good. If you haven't chimed in yet on the chat thread, feel free to say something. Okay, we got 13 responses, looking for a few more, but let's go ahead and take a look at the drive-in total so far. Okay, so the procedures I use at work are generally accurate, up-to-date, and helpful. Wow, so this is telling. In this group, among 16 responses, 31% of people are saying that's true, and about 68% of people are saying procedures are either out of date or inaccurate or some way non-helpful. Chip, you can't respond for some reason. Have you tried, Chip, have you tried both the link and the QR code? That's why I kind of give a plan B. Hopefully one of those will work. And if not, maybe Heather, if you could maybe chat with HIP online or offline, that'd be great. Number 2, I or other end users like me have substantial input on creating the work procedures we're expected to use. 58% say true, which is great. 41%, pretty big slice, says no. That's hard when you don't have any input in the work procedures you're expected to create. The amount of procedures that my boss expects me to use is reasonable. 41% true, which is great. About 58, 59% are saying false. And I'm assuming it's too many procedures, but chime in for that. So number 4, my company respects the use of rules of thumb or guidelines, principles, and tacit skill when appropriate. Sorry, and every time somebody chimes in new, every time somebody else finishes the survey, it pops up. I can't really control that. They understand that procedures are not the only solution. 88.9% of people say yes, that's great. My organization could benefit from using fewer procedures and more rules of thumb, guidelines, principles, and tacit skill when appropriate. Wow, 61% of people say true, 38, 39% of people say false. That is fantastic. You all are in the right place because I think you're going to get a lot out of what I've got to give you this way. Let's see, check in the chat thread. And Heather, thank you very much for kind of troubleshooting and seeing if you can get people to be able to answer those questions. And thanks, folks, for chiming in on this. Okay, great. So that was a quick check-in. Now that I know we're in the right place, let's dive in and see what we got. So when Taylor started propounding his principles, tongue twister, about 9 out of every 10 working people did manual work, repetitive stuff on a farm or in a factory, moving things, farming, mining, or transportation. So that was back in 1911 when F.W. Taylor first wrote his stuff. How does that change? Pretty dramatically. We know that. Workplace then versus many workplaces now. As Peter Drucker said, by 2010, it will constitute no more than 1/10. So the world has kind of gone like that. Everything has changed. From now on, what matters is the productivity of non-manual workers. So that's one reason why we can't proceduralize everything these days, because the jobs today, most of them require a lot more dynamic thinking. And another piece of evidence, this is from a great book called Managing the Unexpected by Wyke and Sutcliffe. This is the kind of the Bible of so-called high reliability organizations. There's about 40 years of research out there on high reliability organizations, or HROs as they call them, flight deck crews of aircraft carriers, air traffic controllers, wilderness firefighters, system operators of the bulk electric grid. I used to work with those folks and a few other groups. And one of the findings they got from the world's most high reliability organizations is you cannot write procedures to anticipate all the situations and conditions that shape people's work. And in fact, that gives people the illusion that they have things under control and blinds them to the very real possibility that they may have gotten it wrong. So what Wyke and Sutcliffe are saying here is not only do procedures not always fit, sometimes they give us a really false sense of security and control when in fact we don't have that. So there's another reason why we can't proceduralize everything. So let's dive a little bit deeper into this idea. Okay, think of two kinds of systems. Most of us are already thinking in terms of systems as opposed to elements or people. What I'd argue is there's at least two kinds of systems. One could be called mechanistic, the other could be called adaptive. So let's dive into that. A mechanistic system is like a machine, hence the name mechanistic, right? Mechanistic systems are very closed and controllable. Think of a factory assembly line, or as the photo shows, a nuclear power plant. There's no such thing as a good surprise in a nuclear power plant, right? You want everything to be controlled, and if anything doesn't go exactly right, you want to be able to hit that big red button on the wall to stop everything and shut everything down. That's a closed, controllable system, and we want nuclear plants to be like that. Mechanistic systems are very deterministic, very one cause, one effect, and that's why traditional root cause analyses work pretty well. If it wasn't X, it was Y. If it wasn't A, it was B, therefore it must be this. You know, the vibration on this particular screw or the lubrication on this particular nut or whatever it was is the cause of everything going down. Very deterministic. And because of all of that, in mechanistic systems, the view that most people have of errors is that they're the same thing as defects. Defects, you want to eliminate defects, right? Drucker and Tom Peters and all the great ISO 9000 and Six Sigma and Lean basically said, hey, let's streamline our processes to eliminate defects. And defects are caused by errors, so gosh, if we could have an error-free system, that would just be perfect. That's a neat thought in theory, and in some ways you may be able to aim for it in very mechanistic systems, but let me tell you why that's very limited. So because of all of this, mechanistic systems, we tend to build very robust systems. We build a mechanism and we encase it in, protective steel, plastic, whatever it is, so nothing can damage it, change it, alter it, anything. If we write computer code, we put a big firewall around it so nobody can hack it, nobody can accidentally change it, no changes to it. Once we get it right, don't mess with it, right? That's building a robust system, and that works for a lot of things. But there's a different kind of system out there. You might call them adaptive systems, and they're very different than mechanistic systems. And even though that adaptive systems are much more like living organisms, your body is a fantastic system, but it's very adaptive. It's not that mechanistic. It adapts, it grows, it changes, it goes through kind of cycles, right? And it's more like a living organism. Adaptive systems aren't closed and controllable. They're more open and dynamic. Think of flying an aircraft in flight. Now, there's a lot of mechanistic elements to that plane, but you can't just say, well, things are not working right, let's hit the stop button. Pilots can't do that. Air traffic controllers can't do that. They've got to deal with a dynamic, open system that they can't always completely control. They have to adapt in the moment. Mechanistic systems don't necessarily work that way. Adaptive systems are not deterministic, one cause, one effect. They're more probabilistic. Cause and effect are loosely related. For example, you want to get a raise at work, and you're thinking, all right, I'm going to talk to my boss and I'm going to go get a raise. You know what? I'm going to take some classes on negotiation, right? And that's going to help me get a raise. Well, if you take a class on negotiation, does that guarantee you're going to get a raise? No. But is there a probabilistic effect? Yes. The more classes and trainings and stuff that you take on negotiation that are good, high quality, is that going to be more likely to get you a good raise? You better believe it. Because of all this, adaptive systems look at errors very differently than mechanistic systems. In adaptive systems, errors are not defects. They're signals that you need to adapt, because in adaptive systems, we are constantly getting those signals all the time, constantly having unexpected things happen. And if we shut down the system every time something unexpected or an error happened, we'd never get any business done. Good example might be troubleshooting, like the photo says. Many of you all, if not all of you all, I expect, are troubleshooters, right? You troubleshoot systems, like this one woman who's troubleshooting an electrical system. Could you tell me the first step in your troubleshooting process or procedure? And if you can, go ahead and just type it in. What's step one in your troubleshooting process or procedure? Go ahead and type it in if you can. Now, for me, Heather, just a quick bit of feedback. My typing, extraordinarily slow. It's like one letter, and I got to wait a couple seconds, one letter. I don't know if anybody else is experiencing that or not. Okay, check voltage, deviation. Okay, great. Some other troubleshooters I've talked to have said, yeah, identify the root cause. That, I would almost say, is later in the process. Understand the system of the plant first. One or two people that I've talked to, yeah, Bob Latino said, define the scope of the problem. So I would say the first step in almost any kind of troubleshooting is, what is the problem, or at least what is the symptom? You're not going to know the problem ahead of time, but you may know what is going wrong, right? Somebody brings you a computer and says, well, the right thing isn't happening. Any good technician is going to say, well, let's recreate the problem and show me what is happening, then I can figure it out, right? So step one might be that. So now here's my question for all of you expert troubleshooters. Great, and you all are expert. Look at this. This is great. What's step 7 in your troubleshooting process? In your troubleshooting process or procedure, what's step number 7? I mean, you all are experts at it, right? You've done it many times before. So what's step 7? There you go, Francisco, thanks. And you're honest enough, Francisco, to say, I don't know. But that doesn't mean you don't know how to do troubleshooting. And if I gave you a specific system that you were expert in, it doesn't mean you don't know the system. Bob Latino saying it's determinable, right? Meaning it depends. Step 7 in any troubleshooting process, by and large, is going to depend on step 6, which is going to depend on step 5. But people who are very mechanistic, who want a step-by-step procedure, hearing the phrase, "it depends," drives them nuts, right? Because they want something strict. They want to see it in writing, but it doesn't work that way. And if you work in adaptive systems like troubleshooting, or the scientists that I work with at some of the research labs, they throw their hands up and they say, "I cannot tell you exactly what the procedure is going to be until I get in it. But that doesn't mean I don't know what I'm doing." And because of that, errors, I cannot predict exactly what kind of errors are going to happen, but what I can do is look at errors very differently. And instead of building a system that is error-free, which is not an option in adaptive systems, I can build a resilient system. I can do troubleshooting in a way where I'm going to get errors, and I'm going to get things that are unexpected, but I'm going to make them safe and inexpensive, so they don't cause any damage and they don't cost a lot of money, but I learn from them. That's the secret of adaptive systems. You minimize the consequences of errors, make them safe and non-expensive and low risk and low maintenance, and you maximize the learning. You squeeze every bit of insight, of wisdom that you can out of every error that happens, and that's how you adapt adaptive systems. So it's not that there's just mechanical or mechanistic or adaptive systems, or one or the other. It's not binary. It's almost like, think of it on a scale of 1 to 10. Almost every job, almost every system that you're going to work in is going to be some blend of mechanistic and adaptive, right? Make sense? Yeah, that sounds like making our maintenance or work systems smart. Yeah, in some ways, yeah. So a scale of 1 to 10, mechanistic to adaptive, and let's get some practical examples here. A factory. To me, a factory is probably on the extreme end of very mechanistic. Very closed and controllable. You don't want errors. It's very robust, and if anything goes wrong, you shut it down, call Bob Latino, do the root cause analysis and figure it out. But as you get a little bit more adaptive, you might be doing, for example, routine work in a scientific lab. Mixing a reagent that you've mixed 1,000 times before. It's pretty much following a chemical recipe. Going up a little bit more adaptive is routine healthcare, like getting a COVID-19 vaccine, which I was lucky to get a couple of days ago. I'm thrilled about it, right? Very routine, it's very procedural, but not entirely, right? A little bit more adaptive might be a scientific experiment. A lot of rules to follow and some procedures, especially if you're working with radiological items, things like that. But ask a scientist and they'll say, "I've got to be adaptive and change the process based on what I find." Troubleshooting is getting up there into the much more adaptive world. Disaster response, like COVID, there's very few procedures for doing disaster response. A year ago, nobody knew what to do with this. We had a few guidelines, but we all adapted to it. And in the very top end of it is something like maybe combat. I served in the military. I was never in combat, but from the experience I had, I can tell you that there's very few procedures that you're following in a firefight, right? It's a lot of other stuff, which I'm going to show you in just a minute, because it's really, really adaptive. So I'm curious, now that you got this basic idea, how interactive, I'm just going to put this whole thing in there. Yeah, that went through. How mechanistic or adaptive is your main job? I would assume that you all are very, very mechanistic given the work that you do, but I'm not so sure after some of the results from previous polls. Go ahead and scan that QR code or click the link, and let's find out how mechanistic versus adaptive you all are. I'm going to take a quick look at the chat thread. Thanks for all the good answers and ideas so far. Observing the crime scene, that's great. All right, so let's look at how mechanistic versus adaptive you all are. Okay, and it's just one question. We got 13 responses. I'm looking for at least about 20, ideally maybe 25 responses. I know a few people are always going to have some problems with the tech, or always going to have a few lurkers that don't want to respond. That's totally fine. 16, 17 responses. And this is the same number line you saw on the slide. Wow, this is really cool. unexpected this is, as Yoda would say. So numbers 1 and 2 and 3, the very, very mechanistic side, nobody has answered that so far. The biggest, most popular answer is number 6, which is more so on the adaptive side, and several people are answering 7, 8, and 9 on the very adaptive side. That is surprising to me, Heather. I would think that basically curve would have been reversed. So very interesting to see that. 21 responses, very good. All right, so what does this mean and what can we do about it? The way that I've looked at it and the research that I've done and the experience I've had over the past 20 odd years, emphasis on odd, basically makes me say, okay, there's basically 4 tools, 4 ways that you can do work, plan work, execute work, perform work. And they're not mutually exclusive. Almost everybody, in fact, uses a blend of them all. But many people think procedures, that's it or nothing. It's like you hear people say, well, if there's no procedure, then you don't know what you're doing, or there's utter chaos. I disagree with that. I think that on the mechanistic side, on the very mechanistic side, you absolutely want explicit procedures. And an explicit procedure, and a good example of that is it's how to do a task. Step 1, turn the power off, right? That's a good example of a mechanistic, very strict procedure. When you're doing substation switching, like in the old job that I used to have, I used to work with people that did substation switching. You better believe they had a written switching order, very strict, you do this, 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 and you don't deviate from it. Explicit procedure is how we keep the lights on. When you're mixing a reagent, especially if it has toxic or some other chemicals in it, it's a pretty strict recipe. We want strict procedures for something. But aircraft mechanics, when you're flying on an airplane, I want to know that the guys and women who are working on that engine had the manual out there and were following it pretty strictly. But things get more interesting once we start getting more adaptive. Once we start getting out of the strict mechanistic world, we start working less with procedures and more with things like heuristics, which is a fancy way of saying a rule of thumb. ROT is a rule of thumb. And a heuristic or a guideline or a rule of thumb tells you what to do, but not exactly how to do it or when to do it. A good example might be, a sign on a cabinet that says, de-energize this system before working on it. Well, it doesn't tell you exactly when to do it or what time of day, or it doesn't tell you exactly how to de-energize it. You got to figure that out or know it or read other resources. It just gives you the guideline. That's much simpler, easier, and much more versatile than an explicit procedure, and it works more in the adaptive world. A couple of examples. In the utility switching industry, we use something called switch before fix. What does that mean? When we roll up to, when a hurricane rolls through town in Virginia, we get hurricanes right here, and it destroys towers like this one, puts transformers on the road, spans of wire, poles. We drive through and basically assess the damage and go, how many tens of thousands of people are out of lights, and then what's the quickest way we can get it back on. You might think that what we do is just start fixing things, right? You see a pole down, fix the pole. What we realized is that's not, following that strict procedure isn't the best way to do it. What's best is to say, you know what, I got 10 spans of wire down, 10 poles, 3 transformers down. Let's switch before fix. Let's switch as many customers to an alternate circuit if one is available and get, let's say, half of those 10,000 people on now within the hour. And then we'll come back and fix the rest of the poles and we'll get the rest of the 5,000 people on that we couldn't switch over. Result is you basically cut your response time in half by doing that one simple heuristic, but it doesn't tell you exactly what circuits to switch from or to. It's a guideline. Switch before fix. And I'm betting you have some guidelines like that in your world. If so, maybe type them into the chat thread. Another good one in medical circles, right? First part of the Hippocratic Oath, do no harm. First, do no harm. It's not a procedure, doesn't tell you exactly how to do protecting against sharps, scalpels, gowning up, wearing masks, doesn't tell you how to do that. It tells you the principle. First, do no harm, right? And everybody in medicine, I used to be an EMT and a firefighter, so I knew this. We don't have to take the Hippocratic Oath legally, but you better believe we tried to do no harm first. If you want to study an organization and find out how it works, follow the, anybody know the last word? Type it in if you can. Want to understand how an organization works? Follow the money. That's it. You tell me, does that work or not? It's a 3-word rule of thumb. It doesn't tell you exactly how to do that, but does that principle work? Type into the chat thread and tell me what you think. Couple of other good rules of thumb. There's some great ones that come out of the military, like if you can't get out of it, get into it. If you got a job and you really don't want to do it, and it's a job that's not going to be fun or interesting or whatever, and you're like, God, can I get out of this job? No, you can't. You got to do it. Well, if you can't get out of it, find a way to get into it. Find a way to make it interesting or fun or rewarding or something, because otherwise it's just going to be misery. It doesn't tell you how to do it. It just tells you, the rule of thumb just tells you, if you can't get out of it, get into it. I have used that repeatedly, and it's helped. Another good example of one, and we're right on time here, so I'll skip forward a little bit. FAA Rule 91.3. If any of you are pilots or know any pilots, you better believe pilots have a lot of procedures to follow. Don't trust me, go ahead and look up FAA Rule 91.3. What it basically says is the pilot in charge of that aircraft can break any other rule in order to maintain the safety of the people on that aircraft and the safety of the people on the ground. It's basically a rule that says you can break all the other rules if you follow the guideline of keep people safe. Pretty cool that the FAA wrote that into their rules. I wish more people would. So those are a few examples of that. Principles, I'm moving forward a little bit here. Principles are the higher level, the 3rd level. Principles don't even tell you what to do. They tell you how a system works, so it's even more adaptive. For example, electricity takes the easiest paths to ground, not path, but multiple paths to ground, right? That took a long time for me to learn, but it changed the way I look at electricity. Knowing that electricity takes the easiest paths to ground doesn't tell you what to do or how to do it, but is it useful to know that principle? You better believe it, right? And the more adaptive the job you're doing, the more useful that principle is, right? A couple of other examples. For high reliability organizations, one great principle for that is high reliability organizations don't try to eliminate errors. They try to make it so that errors don't disturb the business of what's going on. You better believe flight deck crews of aircraft carriers have some errors, but they can't just shut down the flight deck every time an error happens. So that's an example of a principle that a high reliability organization uses that most other people don't. And the last example, the last option other than explicit procedures is tacit skill. That's the unwritten knowledge you've got in your head where I can do a job, but I can't really explain how I do it. How many of you all know somebody who basically says that and they mean it? They can't quite explain to you what they do or how they do it, but you can depend on them to get a job done 99% of the time. And maybe another question is, can you do that? Is there a job you do where you're good at the job, but you can't quite explain how you do it? Type into the chat thread if that applies to you, if you can do that, or if you know somebody that has some tacit skill. I'm curious. So a couple of good examples might be troubleshooting. Sometimes really good troubleshooters can solve a problem, but if you say, well, how did you know to look at this particular circuit? They can't tell you exactly why. They can't put their finger on it. And a good example of this was Darlene in our opening story. Darlene looked at Melissa in the isolate and didn't see just one or two symptoms, but that constellation of symptoms, but she couldn't tell you exactly which ones made her go, I think it's sepsis. They hired her afterwards to say, will you help rewrite the sepsis protocols and manuals and things so that we know better how to look for sepsis? Can you teach other nurses to do what you do? And she said, yeah, of course. So this is absolutely alive and well in dynamic adaptive organizations. But many people still think, hey, it's either procedures or nothing. I'm curious, with just a little bit of time to go left, which guidance tool do you use the most? We can't beat them. Join them. Yeah, Bob, that's a great question. Is this consistent with knowledge-based, rule-based, skill-based errors? They're related. What Bob's talking about is Jens Rasmussen's concept of skill-based, rule-based, and knowledge-based errors. I wish we could discuss it verbally. Look that up. Yes, they are related, I think. I'm making kind of the opposite argument of Rasmussen, saying there's definitely some times when it's not only okay, but probably preferable to use the less prescribed skills. I'm curious at which work guidance tool do you tend to use the most? Is it procedures? Is it heuristics, rules of thumb, or guidelines? Is it principles, or is it tacit skill? Go ahead and scan, and then I will show you the results. And then we're going to go ahead and skip ahead to the suggestion I've got for you, and then we'll do some questions and answers. Okay, hopefully everybody has scanned it. If not, scan it really quickly.
Jake, we seem to have...
And here we go. Yeah, what's up?
We seem to have lost your video. I don't know if you clicked something, if you might be having an internet glitch.
Oh boy, okay. Can you still hear me okay?
We can still hear you.
Okay,
which is
nothing
fine.
has changed on my side. Is it okay? Is it back?
It's not back, but we can, yeah, we can see your screen and hear you fine. So we can keep going like this. Just wanted to let you know.
Out of all the people on the call, I'm the least important person to see. If you can hear me, and that's okay. So we got responses, and Heather, just as a kind of a backup plan, as a plan B, you've got my phone number. So if something really doesn't work, if you can't hear me on this, go ahead and just call me, and we'll figure out something. Okay?
Yep, sounds good.
We got 13 responses. Be great to get a few more. What work guidance tool do you use the most? Oh, this is really cool. I would not have predicted this. Okay, so procedures. 15.4% of you were saying procedures is the thing you use the most. I would have expected for what you all do that would have been the major one. Heuristics, the second level. Rules of thumb, which is what to do but not how to do it. That's 31% of people, so that is equal with principles. 31% of people. You will use principles, which is how a system works, but not what to do or how. And now principles, with that last result, just took the lead. And tacit skill, 21.4% of people are saying tacit skill, the unwritten knowledge, that is your major thing. That is pretty incredible. I would not have thought about that for you all, but I'm interested to hear that that's the case. So let me go back to the slides here. We're tight on time. I have more content, but you know what? I don't want to give you too much content. What I'm going to do is skip forward, and I'm going to tease you just a little bit and say, if you've ever heard of the terms work as imagined and work as done, which are these two things, that is a really cool concept. And more people are starting to ask, for every job, there's the work as imagined, which is usually the procedure, work as documented, and there's the work as done, how it actually gets done in the real world. That's what we call in the military the ground truth, and there's almost always a delta between the two. We may have to come back and do another webinar for that. If you want to learn a little bit more about it, here's a great journal article, magazine article, and it's based on air traffic controllers, but it's free. You can download it, and it's kind of a neat thing to read. So I wanted to tell you first, in terms of practical results for this, don't walk out of this saying, oh, you know, Jake told me I don't have to follow required procedures anymore. No, please, let's all try to stay out of trouble, shall we? So no, you didn't hear that from me or Heather or Bob. Second idea, second strategy is consider using those terms. Look it up, read a little bit about it, and just start using that language a little bit when you work and see how it changes how you think about your work by dividing it into those two categories. And three, here's the big one. Look at the jobs that you do. And for each job, for each process or procedure that you do, kind of ask, is it really appropriate to have a procedure for this job? And if it is, keep it, obviously. But if it's not, consider turning it into, that procedure into collections of guidelines, rules of thumb, principles, and even expert notes, tacit knowledge. One organization that I work with did exactly this. It was actually an electrical team that worked on very high hazard stuff, electricity. They used to have very strict procedures, but they had so many of them, you couldn't work without having those procedures conflict. One group had, like, for one job, had 9 different procedures they had to integrate, and it conflicted. So the answer to the question, were you following procedure, is, I don't know, which one of the 9 procedures are you talking about? They morphed that over a couple of years into manuals for many of their jobs, and their incident rate dropped dramatically, so much so that they wound up having about 1,000 incident-free days. No incidents, no near misses in over 1,000 days after they started doing a few things, including using manuals as opposed to just strict procedures. That's one example. If you all have other examples, I would love to hear about them. We're tight on time. I wanted to give you this summary of what we did today. And this is something I'm going to put in here. I kind of make this available to you all for free. I ask that you do use this, a couple of conditions. One, please don't use it commercially. Please don't take it, sell it, repackage it, call it your own or anything like that. Two, please keep it intact. Don't edit it. Don't use a part of it. If you want to print it out or use it or give it out as a PDF in whole without editing, that would be great. That has my kind of contact information at the bottom. It's free. It just kind of gives proper credit where credit is due. So feel free to use it that way. The notes are on the bottom. Can somebody give me a quick thumbs up that the link works and that the QR code works? Just somebody, if you wouldn't mind, say link works and QR code works. That'd be great. And with that, great, super. Link works, everything works, super. Thanks, guys. Folks, I appreciate it. Quick 90-second recap. Why do we keep trying to proceduralize everything? F.W. Taylor and Deming's quality movement. Why can't we do it? Most 21st century jobs are a lot more adaptive than they are mechanistic. What's the core insight? It's not just procedures versus chaos. You got procedures, heuristics, rules of thumb, principles, and tacit skill. And how do you apply that? Experiment with work as imagined versus work as done. Learn more about that. And just one at a time, work with the frontline leaders, or if you are a frontline leader or worker, see if you can transform strict and inaccurate procedures into more flexible manuals that actually work better. Quick thanks to Bob Latino for the I would not have found out about the group except for him. And open for questions in just about 1 minute. I'm going to do this quick feedback form. Sure would appreciate your feedback on the feedback form. Not going to show results of that, obviously. And if you like what you saw today, you may be interested in some more free resources. Check out my website, and you can subscribe to get free email tips on human reliability, including upcoming webinars like this one. I'm actually giving this webinar again, open to the public, in about a week or so. Folks, what questions do you have? Go ahead and type it into the chat thread. We've got a few minutes left. And what questions do you have for me? Jeff, thanks for the feedback. Appreciate it. Neil, let's see. What procedure does it best fit with figurative or text-based? God, Neil, I want to answer that, but I'm not exactly sure what you're asking. And this system doesn't allow you to chat in and talk. Otherwise, I'd say talk. Neil, here's my offer to you. Go to my website. I don't know that I can answer that productively right now. If you go to my website, scroll down to the button, it's going to say book some time to call. It's free. Just send me an email, book some time for us to call if you want to. I'll talk to you about it then. I'm hoping that might help. Sorry, I can't do it more. Ventigem. I'm not sure if I got that anywhere close right. Ventigem, thank you, appreciate it. Henry, how do you drive this in an organization that's very strict on procedures? Yeah, how do you do that? Long time ago in the 1960s, a guy named Thomas Kuhn, Kuhn, wrote a book called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. He basically asked the question, how do we switch from one model of science to another? Like, you know, Newton is right, and all the planets work in these mechanical ways, and if you just fill in the right formula, everything's right. How do we move from that to Einstein? And from Einstein to quantum physics? These are enormous paradigm shifts. Bigger, but related to what you're asking me. And what he basically said was, you can't just attack the existing one. You got to gently, over time, show the problems with the existing paradigm and then show the benefits to yours. What you're going to have to do basically is just kind of keep collecting the evidence that this stuff works. I think I just wrote a blog post about it. If not, get on my blog post, connect with me on LinkedIn. I will give you more evidence on stuff like this as I come about it. And then try to slowly do short little experiments, low risk, low cost, quiet experiments kind of under the radar. And when they're successful, then fire off the fireworks and go, look what we did by trying this out, and share those successes with as many people as you can. You just do that over time until you build up your allies and you win over your skeptics. It's kind of a long-winded answer, but it's a great, great question. That was a great question. Thank you for that. And did that answer your question a little bit, at least a little bit? It looks like you said, okay, very good. How should an organization or department start doing this? Same answer, basically same answer. Read more about work as imagined versus work as done. Kind of be able to show to people that you think we're safe completely with procedures. There's almost always a delta between what's written, the way you think work is getting done, and the ground truth of how work actually gets done. The more you can gently show to people that illusion you have that procedures are all we need, that is not how work gets done most of the time. The more they're going to be open to, well, what would you suggest? And then you can show them some of the successes you've had. Does that make sense? Boom, this is it. Robert, thank you. I appreciate it, Bob. Good questions. Folks, that's about it. If you want more information, obviously check out my website, reliableorg.com. There's a good blog on there I actually just put up. Connect with me on LinkedIn. That QR code will take you to one of the two. I'm not sure which one. You can try both out. And shoot an email. If it's a bigger, tougher question, go ahead and shoot me an email, even set some time to talk. Hopefully I'll be able to help. I give workshops, courses, and stuff like this on a regular basis. That's my living. So if you're interested, please give me a call. I do most everything virtual. So stay in touch, and I'll try to do the same. Heather, thanks so much for letting me present and take up all the time. The hour just flew by for me.
I know.
Did I give you what you're looking for on this presentation?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jake, for being here. I love how the presentation was so grounded in examples and shared some really valuable insight. I think definitely a new kind of conversation, at least for me and probably many in this group as well. So I really appreciate you guiding us through that and taking the time today.
Good deal. Thanks very much. Stay in touch, everyone, and I'll try to do the same.
Will do. We'll talk soon. Thanks, everyone, for coming. See you next time.
Bye now.